So we are moving right along here in Rudolf Steiner's outline of esoteric science, and we're up to Chapter 5, Knowledge of Higher Worlds, Initiation. This is a very long chapter. It's about 100 pages, and it's pretty much a miniaturization of his book, How to Know Higher Worlds. That contains a lot of the same material. And Steiner's process of what he calls initiation is, as we'll see, exactly equivalent, morphologically anyway, equivalent to Jung's process of individuation. Now, Steiner's model, as we have seen, has a number of different variations: a threefold model of body, soul, and spirit, then the fourfold model with the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the I, or the ego. That's the fourfold model. And then there's the sevenfold model. And I think the sevenfold model has the most relevance here. The sevenfold model is physical body, etheric body, astral body, then the soul, and then above that is the spirit self, the life spirit, and the spirit body. So the sevenfold model is sort of interesting in that it corresponds in a loose morphological way to the seven chakras of Kundalini Yoga. And indeed, I think that Steiner was very much familiar with Kundalini Yoga. He even mentions at a certain point in this chapter that what we'll be doing is creating lotus flowers as new organs of spiritual perception. And this is done through his upper three chakras, in a way, are, as it were, these three faculties of what he calls imagination, inspiration, and intuition. These are the higher faculties of man's spirit. And those loosely do correspond to imagination, to spirit self, and then inspiration to life spirit, and then intuition to the spirit body. So the process will be then, in a way, it's transmuting the lower three chakras into the higher three chakras. Steiner's lower three chakras being the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and all three of those are transmuted through the process of initiation into the spirit self, the life spirit, and the spirit body. In the same fashion as in Kundalini Yoga, the lower three chakras, we have 7 chakras there, and the lower three chakras are transmuted via the middle chakra, the heart chakra, into the higher three chakras, such that let's say the chakra of the belly, the one that's at the belly, the Manipura, that chakra is the will to power chakra, which is then transmuted via the 4th chakra into the throat chakra, which is the Vishuddha chakra, which has to do with self-control and asceticism. So will to power against others is transmuted into will to power against oneself through spiritual practices. The next chakra down is the genitals, the Svadhisthana. That becomes transmuted into the Agya chakra, which is the chakra of the middle eye that beholds the gods. And so physical love, physical sexuality becomes love for God. It's transmuted for love for God at that level. And then finally, the bottommost chakra at the perineum, the Muladhara, which is just pure spiritual stagnation. This is the point of view, let's say, of materialists who get stuck in this conception that there isn't anything beyond the material world, is then transmuted into the crown chakra, the 1,000-petaled lotus, or the Sahasrara chakra, as it is known. And so likewise with Rudolf Steiner, we'll see that the lower three chakras, I'm calling them chakras just metaphorically, they're not chakras, but the physical body, the etheric body, and the astral body is transmuted, will be transmuted into the spirit self, just as the etheric body will be transmuted into the life spirit, and the final one is physical body into spirit body. So that's the process. So I'm convinced 100% that he knew the chakra systems of the Kundalini. Okay, so that's said with that little prelude out of the way. Steiner in this chapter begins to get very concrete about giving concrete exercises that will begin the process of what he terms initiation into knowledge of supersensible things, knowledge of the higher worlds, as his other book is called. And to this extent, he gives a few exercises. And he says, take, for instance, here is an exercise for what he calls imaginative cognition. So this is the stage of imagination, the faculty or structure of consciousness, let's say, of imagination. And he says, imagine in your mind's eye a plant, and imagine it rising up out of the soil, putting forth leaves as it goes along, and the sap in that plant as rising up, doing this process, just as imagine a human being right next to this plant who doesn't have sap but has instead red blood. Now, as the sap rises, it's transmuted into the flower, let's say a rose that is beautiful, where the sap is sort of alchemically transmuted into the red sap of the rose. Likewise, the human being, though the human being is a more perfect and more highly evolved being than a plant, nonetheless, the plant follows laws of growth that are passionless. They just happen. Whereas human beings have astral bodies and by definition are troubled by passions, urges, and desires, the lower aspects of our twofold origin, let's say, our animal nature. But nonetheless, the process of the transmutation of the blood into a higher spiritual being through cultivating these three faculties is what's going to happen. And so he just wants you to imagine the analogy between the plant and the human, what is deficient in the plant but also superior in it. It's deficient in that it doesn't have the more highly evolved astral body, but it does have the virtue of not being tormented by passions and desires. Humans are more highly evolved. They have astral bodies that plants don't have, but astral bodies come equipped with urges and desires. I would say, just as a footnote, that Freud's conception of the id is somewhat close to Rudolf Steiner's conception of the astral body. That's where all the passions and desires come from, except that Steiner's concept is a larger concept that has to do also with the opening out into space and time of a waking consciousness, since animals have it too. And it opens up a space and time in which there is a freedom of mobility that the plant does not have. So he says, continue imagining this process, and that what is base in man can be purified and transformed into something higher. So he says, imagine a cross. Imagine the shape of a cross, and we'll say that it's black, and the black means the baser desires. These correspond to the human base desires. Now imagine a ring of 7 roses right around the middle of that cross where the beams intersect. Now you've got 7 roses, and that is the sublimation and transformation of what is base in the human being into the spiritual elements of what is higher. And he says this is the type of exercise that will now move you into imaginative cognition. And the purpose of that is to break free from sense perceptible, from a reliance upon sensory information. Our senses are passive. Our eyes and our ears are always taking in information. And in India, this is called chitta. The interior consciousness is called chitta. And the property of chitta is that it's always in motion. And it takes on passively the forms of the outer world that are impressed upon it. Kind of like Play-Doh, when you roll it over a newspaper and lift it up, there's the image of the newspaper on it. Chitta is kind of like that, which is why Patanjali's definition of yoga is yoga consists in the intentional stopping of this spontaneous mind stuff, of the activity of the mind stuff, which is always in motion. In a way, Steiner's sort of doing something like that, except he's not after total yogic stasis in either nirvana or moksha or the union of Atman with Brahman. Those are alien ideas to Steiner's system here. So he says, this process then is imaginative cognition, and it will begin to awaken this faculty within you. It could be said, I suppose, that poets and artists are naturally do this. They naturally are capable of disengaging themselves from sense perceptible information and living in a world of the imagination, of images, a world of imagination. But Steiner, I think, means something a little different. He means a much more controlled process of image control. And he says it doesn't matter. There are all kinds of images, symbolic ones like the Rosicrucian meditation, the Rose Cross meditation that we just did. Those work better. But you could meditate, I think, on How to Know Higher Worlds. He has you meditate on a seed held in the palm of your hand, and then meditate on the process of the plant emerging from the seed. The idea is to free the senses from reliance for their information on the external physical world. And that's what the process of imagination consists in. And he says there are 5 important things, though, that as you move into this higher world, there has to be control of one's thinking, control of one's willing, control of one's feeling, what he calls positivity and what he calls receptivity. So control of thinking, he says, exercises that you can do, because you have to get control of thinking, since what the process we're doing here is extracting a second higher I from a lower I. And the lower I, you don't want to, if it sort of gets left behind, as it were, can become chaotic. And so following this kind of spiritual discipline will prevent that from happening, will prevent it from becoming chaotic. And so control over thinking is, he says, take an object, just a physical object like a pencil, let's say, and just meditate on it for 5 minutes. Just focus on it. Don't let any other thought intrude. Focus on its nature, its properties, on where it came from, what it does, how it was manufactured. He says that gives you the ability, if you do that for 5 minutes a day, that will give you the ability to think and focus, so that your mind's not wandering and you can focus through these meditative processes. And he says control over one's willing can be done by doing the same task every day at the same time. Pick a task. He doesn't specify what task. I don't know, washing the dishes maybe or something. Whatever it is, it's done at the same time, which controls the willing. So the thinking and the willing and the feeling is controlled by not going too far to passionate extremes. It achieves a certain composure in the face of both joy and sorrow. A sense of composure. And he says it doesn't restrict your sense of experiences, but it makes you more open and receptive to them, which is the 5th one of these, receptivity to new experiences. And the 4th one, of course, was the one about, let's see, thinking, feeling, willing, and then the 4th one, which is escaping me right now, but it has to do with, it's positivity, which has to do with seeing the positive side of things, but without editing out the negative side. And he says there's a parable about Christ that's found in a poem of Goethe's that's based on an original from the Persian poet Nizami, where Christ is walking along with some disciples, and they see a dead dog lying in the road, and the disciples are disgusted by it. But Christ says, yes, but look at its teeth. They're perfect. Doesn't it have beautiful teeth? And that's an example of what Steiner means by positivity. That's the example that he gives in the sense that you don't just look at the world with rose-tinted glasses. Everything is great. Everything is fantastic. You see evil and suffering and recognize them, the ugly, as well as the beautiful. But there's always a positive side to any given situation. He says these 5 traits are absolutely essential for attaining a certain kind of self-control here. His ideas are a little bit like a kind of a fusion of Hinduism with Roman Stoicism, as well as German idealist philosophy. And so he says, so that's how the process begins of awakening the faculty of imagination. Or actually, he says, what we're doing is creating thought organs. Imagination, inspiration, and intuition are, as he says, metaphorically could be thought of as lotus flowers, and he uses that term, lotus flowers. So he's definitely talking about the chakras, except that, as with the 4 subtle bodies that he took from Vedanta, he's totally reterritorialized them. They're very different. They're not the same as they were in the original context. And so the process is that we're creating thought organs. He even says they're almost like little organisms that we're constructing in the astral body. So these are basically moving into the stage of imagination is almost like awakening the chakras, except it's the upper 3 chakras, or maybe the 4th as well, since the 4th includes compassion and love and so forth. So from the 4th through 4, 5, 6, and 7 chakras, we're awakening them, but the terminology he uses is that we're actually creating these little thought creatures. They're like thought organisms made out of subtle matter that we are creating within us through entering into this world of imagination. And so next we'll look at the process of the next level up, inspiration, which is the sublimation, of course, of the etheric body. Inspiration, which will have to do with the ear, not seeing images, but now with hearing the spiritual world in a certain way. And then finally, we'll conclude with intuition, which will have to do with actually peering into spiritual beings, being able to remember your past lives, and so forth. And so Steiner says we're creating a new I here. We're extracting a second I, a higher I, from a lower I in doing this process of spiritual evolution.